There's a moment television almost never gives you twice. A man famous for his icy stare and blunt put-downs, sitting frozen in his chair, visibly caught off guard, unable to hide what he is actually feeling. Simon Cowell had that moment once in 2009, and for 17 years, he mostly let the clip speak for itself. Then, in 2026, he finally said out loud what he had apparently been carrying quietly the whole time. And almost in the same breath, the woman at the center of that moment revealed something she had been hiding from the world for over a year. This is the story of what Simon Cowell finally admitted, and what Susan Boyle had been through in silence while he stayed quiet. Long before anyone knew her name, Susan Boyle was an unemployed woman from a small town in West Lothian, Scotland, walking onto a stage in front of a panel that had already decided who she was before she opened her mouth. Simon Cowell sat behind that desk, expecting another forgettable audition. He has since admitted that his expectations that day were, in his own words, low, and that he privately hoped she would not even sing, simply because he had already sat through so many rough performances that afternoon. Then she did sing. The moment Susan launched into I Dreamed a Dream from Les Miserables, the entire room shifted. Piers Morgan's jaw dropped, Amanda Holden gasped, and Simon Cowell, of all people, sat frozen, caught completely off guard by a voice nobody in that auditorium expected to hear. The clip spread across the internet within days, eventually racking up figures close to 100 million views worldwide, a number almost unheard of in the early days of viral video. What made the moment so powerful was never just the voice. It was the contrast. Susan had walked out looking like she did not belong on a talent show stage, and the judges, along with millions of viewers at home, had already formed a verdict in their minds. When she opened her mouth and delivered a performance that silenced the room, it forced everyone watching to confront their own snap judgment. That single audition became, in many ways, the defining lesson in humility that Simon Cowell would end up referencing again and again over the years that followed. Susan finished the series in second place, losing out to the dance group Diversity, but the loss barely mattered. Her debut album, released just weeks after the final, shot straight to the top of the charts and became the best-selling album in the United Kingdom that year. It was the beginning of a career nobody, including Susan herself, had truly prepared for. Behind the scenes, the road to that stage had not been easy. She had tried out for a different talent competition years earlier without success, and her ambitions had been repeatedly delayed by loss. First when her sister died in 2000, and again in 2007 when her mother passed away after Susan had spent years caring for her. By most accounts, Susan decided to finally chase her dream partly in her mother's memory, walking onto that Glasgow stage less than 2 years after burying her, a piece of context that was largely unknown to the millions watching live. For a long time, Simon let the audition speak for itself. He praised Susan publicly, called her one of the greatest moments in the show's history, and made sure clips of her performance stayed in circulation whenever the franchise wanted to remind audiences of what it was capable of producing. But in 2026, nearly 2 decades after that first audition, Simon finally said something that caught even longtime fans off guard. Sitting down for a podcast interview, he reflected candidly on how he, Piers Morgan, and Amanda Holden had reacted the moment Susan walked out, describing the panel's now infamous facial expressions and admitting that the trio had looked, in his own blunt assessment, awful and ashamed of themselves in that initial burst of skepticism. He did not stop there. He openly acknowledged that all 3 judges had misjudged her long before she sang a single note, and that the entire moment served as a lesson in never underestimating someone based on appearance alone. This was not the polished, rehearsed praise Simon usually gives about the franchise's biggest moments. It read as something closer to genuine reflection, the kind that comes from a person looking back at a mistake they still think about. Around the same time, Simon revisited the audition again during a conversation for America's Got Talent, sitting beside host Terry Crews to rewatch the old footage. He admitted he had been having a difficult day before Susan walked out, and that he privately hoped no one else would sing because he had already sat through so many rough auditions that day. When Susan proved him wrong, he called her the perfect example of why nobody should judge a book by its cover. The timing of these comments, arriving in the same year Susan was quietly preparing her own return to music, gave the reflection extra weight. It felt less like nostalgia and more like an acknowledgement that the moment had shaped him just as much as it shaped her, and that the lesson never fully left him even after 17 years in the industry. While Simon was busy reflecting on the past in front of cameras and microphones, Susan was quietly fighting a battle that fans knew almost nothing about, one that would test her far more than any judging panel ever could. Fame had arrived for her almost overnight, and it came with a level of scrutiny she had never asked for. Before Britain's Got Talent, she had spent most of her life in the same council house in Blackburn, caring for her mother until her death in 2007. She had grown up as the youngest of a large family, was bullied in school over a childhood diagnosis of learning difficulties, and later revealed that she has Asperger's syndrome, something she has said helped her understand herself better once she finally had the diagnosis in hand. After the show, Susan released a string of albums that performed remarkably well given how unconventional her rise to fame had been, and by the early 2020s, she had sold more than 25 million records worldwide, placing her among the most commercially successful talent show contestants in television history. But the fame that made her famous also came at a personal cost. Susan has spoken openly in past interviews about the exhaustion and anxiety that followed her rapid rise, including a brief hospital stay after the 2009 final as she adjusted to a level of attention she had never experienced. She has described her pre-fame life as mundane and routine, a stark contrast to the whirlwind that followed. Even as her career grew, she remained deeply connected to her roots, continuing to volunteer at her local Catholic church in Blackburn and visiting elderly members of her congregation whenever her schedule allowed. By the late 2010s, Susan had scaled back her public appearances considerably, choosing quality over quantity when it came to performances and interviews. She released a 10th anniversary compilation album in 2019 to mark a decade since her audition, accompanied by a short tour. But even then, longtime fans could sense that something in her health and stamina had changed. What nobody outside her closest circle knew was just how serious that change would eventually become. Susan later revealed that in April 2022, she suffered a stroke that left her unable to. She has compared the rehabilitation to taking small, careful steps, warning that pushing too hard too fast risked undoing the progress she had fought so hard to make. Confidence, she admitted, took even longer to rebuild than her voice did. Despite the setback, Susan never fully stepped away from public life. She made a cameo appearance connected to a film project, contributed a new song to a soundtrack, and spoke about an upcoming documentary and drama project covering her own story. Speaking to a Scottish broadcaster near the end of 2024, she described the ordeal bluntly, admitting the process had been hard while insisting it had also given her a renewed hunger to keep going. Throughout it all, Susan leaned heavily on her longtime manager and her close circle of family and church friends back in Blackburn, the same support network that had carried her through the sudden fame of 2009. Those closest to her said the stroke recovery mirrored the same quiet determination she showed as an unknown singer walking onto a stage full of skeptics, the same stubbornness that refused to accept the idea her singing career was simply over. Just when it seemed Susan might quietly fade from the public eye for good, 2026 brought a comeback nobody expected, least of all the woman at the center of it. In May, she shocked her followers by wiping her social media accounts almost completely clean, leaving behind a single post teasing that a new era was starting. Within days, the answer arrived. Susan confirmed she was returning to the recording studio for the first time since 2019 to work on new material, marking her first new project in 6 years. Speaking about the return, she called the experience wonderful and emotional, admitting that stepping back into a recording booth was something she had once been told she might never do again. She specifically credited her longtime manager Geraldine for standing by her through the entire ordeal, describing that support as central to helping her find her way back to what she called her happy place. She described taking small, careful steps with her singing, cautioning again that moving too quickly in recovery risked undoing months of hard-won progress, and admitted her confidence had taken even longer to rebuild than her physical voice had. The comeback did not stop at music. Organizers confirmed that Susan would make her first-ever festival appearance as Scottish Festival scheduled for August 2026, joining a well-known Scottish bagpipe act, for a special collaborative set. For a performer who had largely avoided large-scale live commercial shows for years, the announcement marked a genuinely significant milestone in her recovery journey. Simon, for his part, appeared genuinely delighted when told about Susan's transformation and renewed energy during an interview timed around his own 10th anniversary judging America's Got Talent. He said he adored her and credited her with doing more good for the Got Talent franchise than almost any other contestant in its history. Susan has been candid about the fact that this comeback will not last forever. She has said she plans to retire from music around 2027, once she finishes recording a final album and completes work on the long-discussed project about her life story. For a woman who once described her ambitions as simply wanting to match the success of her idol Elaine Paige, the idea of closing out her career on her own terms, backed by a festival appearance and new music, represents a full-circle moment few could have scripted better. Simon, meanwhile, shows no signs of slowing down, remaining an active judge and executive producer across the Got Talent franchise on both sides of the Atlantic. What makes this story different from so many other talent show breakouts is how it refuses to fade quietly into nostalgia. Nearly 2 decades after that Glasgow audition, both Simon and Susan keep finding new reasons to revisit it, whether through a candid podcast confession, a stroke recovery update, or a surprise festival booking. Their connection has become less about a single viral moment and more about a shared history that keeps writing new chapters, long after most people assumed the story had already ended. Susan has said in past interviews that money was never the driving force behind her return to music, describing singing instead as something closer to a need than a job, the same need that pushed her onto that Glasgow stage in the first place all those years ago. Whatever comes next, one thing seems certain. The audition that once made the world stop and listen is still shaping both of their lives, nearly 17 years later, in ways that continue to resonate with audiences who thought they already knew the whole story.